Good morning, everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to be with you here. For those of you who don't know much about who I am or what I do, I'm from an organization called the Future Laboratory. We're a trend forecasting, consumer insight, and strategic innovation business. And our focus really is to answer some very simple questions. What's new and what's next? And most importantly, to do that with the mind and the heart of the consumer at the center of everything we do. So we're constantly thinking to think and act with the mind of the consumer, and that's what we do. We put the consumer first in everything we do, which of course is what today is really absolutely about. So I want to start to help us to think about that, which of course is really important, especially in the kind of times that we live in. I mean, if you just think about the week that we've been through, it's a pretty incredible one for anyone involved in the trend forecasting or trend prediction business. But then actually trying to work out what people are going to do next is pretty important for any of us, especially those of us in retail. I mean, suddenly the expression, "mum's gone to Iceland," takes on a whole new meaning. And so that sense of really trying to preempt the consumer sentiment and understand where the consumer is going is something I want to start to reveal and share with you this morning. Okay, I think this quote for us is a start of this journey, which is that we're now at a point where we've seen some very big changes over the last 20 years, but we're beginning to see more, and they're coming quicker and quicker and quicker. And what we're beginning to see is how generations are beginning to behave in some very interesting and very different ways. It's important, I think, to remember that our millennial consumer is now hitting mid-30s, between the age of 25 to 35. So that sentiment and that idea of what it means to be young is beginning to change. And moving up behind them, we have another generation, sometimes called Generation Z. We prefer to call them Generation Viz at the Future Laboratory because we think it actually kind of embraces their mindset much better, which is this focus on the visual of how we really have moved in the main as a generation where our focus is often on text to one where our interest is on the visual, hence the growth of all of our social media platforms that aren't just about typing words, but are actually about posting visuals or sharing images, rating them, liking them, and using those as a platform to actually influence others. But also underneath this, I think, is another really interesting mindset shift, which is how suddenly, for many of us, the world feels flat and deeply uninteresting when it's not moving. And this idea of this attraction of the moving image and how so much of that has come from the screen age's perspective of a world that is constantly changing and constantly moving puts a huge impetus on the retailer to think about what are often a flat and dull and uninteresting environment the in-store space can be. We'll come back to that in a minute. So I want to start by focusing on this idea of the new consumer. Our consumer primarily under the age of 35, not exclusively, I don't want to just talk about them, but clearly I want to focus on them at the start. You know, what's happening with our retailer, for our retailers, of our consumer of tomorrow. And this idea of understanding our millennial and our Gen Viz lies at the heart of that. And therefore, for us, there are three key words, this idea of immediacy, immersion, and interaction. And this is what they're craving. This is what they're demanding. This is often what's forcing them to walk out of a store where there is no interaction, where there is no sense of immediacy, and where there is no sense of this idea of immersion. Give me a world that I can suddenly feel I am part of. Which is why at the Future Laboratory we came up with the word phygital. This confluence of the physical and the digital, of what happens when we put the two together. And indeed, research over the last 2 years has shown that successful retailers are those that actually manage to combine both a digital and an in-store strategy, to bring the two together and to often encourage the use of devices, either supplied by the store or the encouragement of people to use their tablets and their phones when they're actually in a store, and to begin to rethink this idea of those rather, I think now, slightly overused and archaic expressions that we've tended to use up to now, this idea of omnichannel or multi-platform, you know, which at the end of the day are just so B2B. They really fail, I think, to sum up the way that the customer is actually behaving, which again is why we tend to think of total retail and having a total retail strategy when it comes to engaging with the 21st century consumer. Because it's the mindset that's changing. That's what's really governing this shift. And part of that is this notion of the hacker mindset, that it's not just about one's ability to hack into a computer program and to modify something on your mobile phone. It's actually that this mindset of being able to change, to move things on, to adapt, to develop them yourselves into a world that suits you and the way that you want things to be, to modify, is, I think, one of the critical lifestyle patterns that defines our under 35-year-old. This ability to change the way the world around them looks and feels and behaves. I don't use any one curriculum, and I'm not afraid to look for a shortcut or hack to get a better, faster result. It's a mindset, not a system. That's from one of the 15-year-olds that we spoke to when we conducted this research. Now, the issue, of course, is here that retail has been phenomenally poor at responding to this kind of exercise. That we really have created in the past an impression or an idea that actually we often know best, and that we are there to, yes, serve our consumer, our customer, but we'll present to them what we think is best for them. That's the way we buy. We buy in advance of consumer need because we think we can understand the consumer better and we know them better than they do. We have often failed to understand who is actually walking through our doors. We often have very little information about the customer that's actually part of our space. So we have to get better at being able to predict and preempt customer need, customer sentiment, and customer requirement. How do we do that? Well, sometimes we can best do that in the retail spaces that we have ourselves, because I think we're all beginning to understand that one of the big things we've learned to appreciate over the last couple of years is that bricks and mortar isn't going anywhere. It's here to stay. As people, we love shops. We love going into shops, and we love the process and the engagement of shopping. And that is not showing any signs of abating. Where we actually push the button to spend is often changing. Where we do our research is changing. How we may chat about what we want to buy is also changing. But for many of us, walking into a store is still an integral part of the retail mechanism. And that's a hugely important part of this process. So the more that we start to create environments in which we can allow the customer to change their retail habits, to engage with new ways of doing things, to try out new opportunities, for us is part of the success, which is why the notion of the lab and the retail lab is coming into preeminence. It's not that we're ditching pop-up, far from it. What we're beginning to understand, though, is that we can actually test things often best, quickest, and fastest in the retail environment itself. It's about that idea of quick and fast innovation. Let's do it here, let's do it now. So whether it be the example we've got here from Sephora, or whether we start to think of what US department store brand Neiman Marcus have started to look at, but that idea of how we encourage newness, change, difference, and innovation within our retail environment is hugely important. The second thing we're beginning to notice is how, with a younger generation that is so socially focused, across different platforms, how we start to rethink what community means as a brand, and how we engage with our community, those retailers who are part of our world, part of our family, the friends, the fans, and indeed the ambassadors who not only come back for more, but also help to encourage other people to engage with our brand, interact with our brand, and learn to love it. A couple of the examples that we've picked up on recently, which I think begin to show this difference, is some of the work that Nike, for example, have been doing. And one of the stores that we've seen this most clearly is in their new Flatbush store in Brooklyn, which is not in one of the kind of fashionable parts of Brooklyn, far from it. But what they've done is to rethink what that store means to the people who are most likely to come there and shop, and how they start to encourage a different attitude, a different mindset, and a different set of engagement with the people that matter to them. So that could be as simple as making sure that at least 80% of their new hires live within a 5-mile radius of that particular store. Starbucks looking at some similar opportunities within their programming and within their employment structure and their engagement strategy. So that sense of thinking about the importance of community that can exist both online and offline for us is another signifier of how things are changing. The third fits into a pattern that we've begun to see emerge, which we've called backlash brands. And this is that brands are beginning to realize that, the customer isn't always right, that actually as a brand, we have a perspective on things. Indeed, we often have a credo. We have a philosophy. Within our brand DNA often are some do's and don'ts, some points about who we are, what we represent, what we stand for, and what we believe in. And of course, the huge emergence of brands over the last 20 years that have stood for something becomes more and more important in these increasingly turbulent and difficult times. So for us, it's no surprise that we start to see the emergence of what's been called righteous retail. Brands that actually share with their customer their point of view, that tell them, well, here at this brand, we do things slightly differently. This is the way we like to behave. This is the way we'd like you to behave. And one of the examples I think we've seen that really highlights this is the US brand Ray, which is an activity, an outdoor brand. And on that day of the year that we find in the US, where classically it's about making as much money as possible, Black Friday, Ray actually closed all of its doors in 143 of its stores because it said everything that Black Friday stands for, we are absolutely against as a brand. It doesn't fit in with our philosophy. It doesn't represent who we are as a mindset. So do you know what we're going to do? We're going to shut all our doors, and as this movie shows us, actually encourage you to do something else.
In the news tonight, another Black Friday has arrived.
Modern tradition, Black Friday.
Lines are already forming, hundreds of people deep.
Just a handful of
This
door-crasher deals inside.
Retailers
opening their doors on Thanksgiving evening.
These employees took their Thanksgiving dinners to go.
The doors are opening.
Shoppers rushed out to pushing back. It was a chaotic scene.
So whether we be Array, whether we be Patagonia, whether we be a number of different brands who decide to take a perspective on an argument, we increasingly believe that these are the kind of platforms that appeal to our younger 21st century consumer. Now, what about the world of retail? What about the landscape of retail? How is that beginning to change? And if we have to start to cast our vision forward and think about the tomorrow store, the retail opportunities in this total retail, phygital world that we now find ourselves in, what are some of the things that we're beginning to see emerge? Well, when we start to think about how this new era of retail is beginning to form, I think we are beginning to see some very interesting shifts, which Martine has already started to tell us about. This idea of what starts to happen if we rethink search, if we rethink our engagement with big data, if we rethink our engagement with algorithms, that we start to think about what predictive means in some very interesting ways. So at the Future Laboratory, we're spending a lot of time thinking about the notion of preemptive retail, preemptive marketing, predictive retail, where in fact we start to look at algorithms that are based on emotions rather than necessarily just spending habits. That it's not just about how much people have spent and where they've spent it, but it's actually about the reasons that are encouraging them to spend, or the emotions that sit behind a reason for spend. So in the future, machine learning specifically is beginning to look at this idea of anticipatory algorithms that really help us to understand the nuances of engagement, that really start to be able to show us that this is the person that has a particular kind of mindset who is very likely to want to shop in this particular kind of way. And increasingly, the tools are there that help us to do this, that enable us to learn more about shoppers and their future habits. And we can do that more than ever before. So for us, it's all about a world of mood retail. That already many of us as retailers no longer necessarily just classify success through sales per square foot. We look at other factors like wonder per square foot. Apple, of course, as a brand, has done exceedingly well using this kind of algorithm or basis for actually classifying success. But what happens if we start to think about the idea of mood per square foot? Of what is it that we're creating? Or how are we actually determining success for our brand in terms of engagement with the customer? What happens if we're a shopping center, to actually start to be able to put a value on the head of every single person who walks through the door of our center, because we can actually identify not just their shopping habits and their spend as they walk through our center and through each individual store, but we can also identify their hotspots, what they engage with, and then also what they choose to buy once they have left our particular store or moved on indeed from that shopping center. So that sense of engagement and that sense of emotional engagement is, of course, hugely important, because at the end of the day, that's what retail is all about. It's about what appeals to us as a human being and as an individual. And we've started to see retail brands that are shifting this balance already in terms of the way, often online, they encourage us to think about a journey through the collection of product that that store might hold, by asking us often very simple questions. Rather than, do you want blue and do you want red? What kind of mood are you in today? How are you feeling? What is it that's going to work for you best as a person? So we move towards the notion of semantic web, of semantic search, that isn't just about, I'm looking for blue, but is about the idea of, I'm feeling blue. Because that's going to reveal a whole lot more about what you might actually want or what you might actually need. We're, of course, also making some big strides in the area of facial recognition, of how we are actually able to respond to the consumer in terms of how they're looking and how they're feeling. So we've seen various apps, for example, that have been able to do that. So Bentley, working with their Inspirator app, that tracks your emotions. It tracks your engagement as you go through a choice-making process that is actually looking at your intuitive response to a series of visual stimuli. And increasingly, that's what we're going to see. We're going to see ways in which we can track a consumer as they walk through our space, engage with our website, engage with our marketing and communication material, and better understand how they are responding to our brand, and most importantly, of course, to our messages. And as the CEO of the iTribe told us recently, in time, these devices will become smarter because they will know your intent. When a device knows where you're looking, you can tell more about the user. And then finally, just to finish, we've been continuing to track the growth of augmented retail, something that many of us have spent quite a lot of time looking at. But as the world becomes more fast-paced, becomes quicker, and it seems that we all want our results in a much speedier manner, we are moving towards a world that at times can seem more cluttered, more busy, but it will still be about cut-through. It will still be about the brands that can actually speak to us and engage with us and actually help to make things more meaningful at the same time that things become more shoppable and also more shareable. So I just want to finish with a little movie that we found from a thinker, an Imagineer called Keiichi Matsuda, who started to look at this world through the hyper-reality lens. And it's a speculative film that starts to imagine a future of AR living. And when we spoke to him recently, he said to us, I really think that augmented reality has the potential to integrate into our daily lives so that media can be everywhere. Let's take a little look.
Adiós.
Bueno. Hola otra vez.
Queso de vaca, queso de oveja, queso de
¿Qué está pasando?
Parece que alguien está intentando vulnerar su cuenta. Por favor, espere mientras reinicio su dispositivo.
Okay, so quite a lot to take in at this time of the morning. While some of us might be going, whoa, phew, thank God everything's returned to normal. The issue, of course, is if we put this with a future mindset on is, well, surely that will become our new normal. And whilst for many of us that might be too much to take on, our question to you is, how do you think your screenager who's grown up with a world of tablets and mobile phones in which everything is constantly moving and changing, and you have the opportunity to reach out and grab and to swipe and to touch, how much actually that vision of the future is part of the world that they are already in? And so that sense of rethinking, of recalibrating for us is hugely important. So, just 3 points to finish with. Can you cater for new demands? Your consumers don't accept the world as it's proffered to them. They're looking for a different world. They're looking for a new world full of excitement, opportunity in which they can immerse, where things are immediate, and where things often are also intuitive. Can you adapt to retail rising, this idea of experimentation, of community, and conviction being the watchwords for this future generation? And then finally, are you up to the challenge of creating a tomorrow store, a total retail environment that works across devices, that works across environments, that is cohesive, that is emotional, that is tactile, and one in which we can get lost in, that we can go back to that basic fact that I think keeps us in stores and keeps us shopping: wonder, inspiration, and the desire, the aspiration to learn more about ourselves through the things that we choose to consume. Thank you very much.